They suspended my base access the same day I left a paper poppy on the memorial wall. Maggie O'Hara, 64, janitor, arthritic wrist and all. The mop handle was still warm in my hands when the letter came edges sharp as the smell of floor bleach. Ever been mistaken for someone invisible? Until you weren't, Margaret. O'Hara moved through the halls like a breeze no one noticed, quiet, regular, and part of the base like the tiles beneath her shoes. Her mop swished in long, even strokes, leaving behind a shine as subtle as the lines around her eyes. The faint scent of lemon disinfectant floated in the corridor, mingling with something sweeter, nutmeg, drifting from the mess hall a few buildings down. Outside, the flag near the entrance flapped lazily in the brisk November air. Leaves, red and gold, tumbled along the pavement, gathering near corners and curbs like small secrets. One managed to slip in when the double doors swung open with a sigh, carried by a breeze that also stirred a photograph hidden behind the glass panel of the memorial wall. It fluttered once, then dropped quietly at Maggie's feet. She bent slowly, not out of frailty, but with the measured care of someone who understood the cost of rushing. Picking up the photograph, she brushed it off with her sleeve and glanced toward the tall, black frame listing names she'd long since memorized. With a sigh that sounded more like a hum, she tucked the photo into her coat pocket and returned to her mop. The base was waking up around her. Young recruits in navy hoodies and tight haircuts jogged past the hallway, their sneakers squeaking on tile. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered kid named Jamal, tilted his head toward her. "There she goes again," he muttered to his buddy. "Cleaning ghosts." The others laughed, not cruelly, but with the careless camaraderie of youth. Maggie neither flinched nor turned. She wasn't invisible because she was weak. She was invisible because people only looked at what they thought mattered. Sergeant Lana Trujillo passed by next, clipboard in hand, boots clicking with purpose. Still haunting the East Wing, O'Hara, she called, not bothering to wait for a reply. "Careful you don't mop yourself into a promotion." Maggie gave a half smile, thin, polite, and moved on. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here because she'd asked to be. Around the corner near the admin offices, Lieutenant Greg Vassell stood in front of a stack of folders. He barely looked up as Maggie entered the hallway. "You're not cleared for this section before 0900, he said, voice clipped like a stapler. "I clean it every morning," Maggie replied, barely above a whisper. Greg didn't bother to argue. He just shook his head and turned back to his files. Maggie continued ringing her mop with a slow rhythm that matched the buzz of the intercom announcing morning PT. Between each hallway, she paused at the memorial wall. There was one frame in the corner with a crooked photo dust gathering along the bottom edge. She stepped on the lever of her mop bucket to keep it in place and gently straightened the frame. From her apron pocket, she took out a paper, poppy hand-cut, a little crumpled, and taped it to the side of the panel where a corner had chipped long ago. No one would notice. But that was fine. At 10:15, she slipped into the break alcove near the storage closet. A half-full thermos of tea waited beside a paper napkin, holding a biscuit she'd packed from home. She unfolded a copy of the Pensacola Gazette, smoothing the front page with both hands. She read slowly, savoring each column like it was conversation. No screens, no taps, no noise, just ink and silence. From behind the corner, Jamal's shadow appeared again. He glanced toward her, caught mid-step, and awkwardly pivoted away. He wasn't sure what to make of her. Not yet. By noon, the corridors smelled stronger of cinnamon and baked yams. Thanksgiving bunting had appeared overnight along the mess hall doorway. Maggie passed through the edge of the commons and saw recruits tying cards to a bulletin board labeled, "Send thanks to home." The colors were cheerful, the handwriting mostly illegible. She returned to the memorial once more. The glass reflected her faintly stooped shoulders, white hair in a tight bun, uniform tucked neat as a pressed envelope. Her gaze fell again to the photo in her pocket. She took it out this time, unfolding it carefully. The picture had dulled from age, black and white with smudges near the corners. But the image was still clear enough, a row of seals in formation, standing stiffly in what looked like a snowy courtyard. Faces were blurred, most turned toward the camera, with the bravado of men who thought the lens captured strength. Except one. Near the edge of the group, almost apart from them, stood a lone woman. Scarf tight around her chin, shoulders squared, but quiet. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking just beyond it, eyes focused far off, unreadable. Maggie traced the edge of the photo with her thumb. The picture shows a SEAL team, blurred faces, grainy image, and one lone woman standing apart, her eyes unmistakable. "I swear she's got keys to everywhere," Trujillo muttered loud enough for the entire mess hall to hear. Forks paused midair. A few heads turned. Someone near the coffee urns chuckled. Maggie kept wiping down table 3, same as she had for the past 5 minutes. Her cloth moved in small circles, the scent of sanitizer barely masking the gravy-heavy air. She didn't look up, didn't wince, just hummed something soft and tuneless. The hum was her way of folding into the wallpaper another layer of background in a base full of noise. Greg Vassell leaned on the counter by the serving window, jaw tight, watching her out of the corner of his eye. The clip he'd reviewed that morning still buzzed in his thoughts, a grayscale blur of someone in janitor whites, walking into SEAL storage at 0542, the door swinging shut behind them. No badge scan, no timestamp on entry. He'd shown it to Trujillo in his office, clicking back through the grainy footage. The figure never looked up. No face. Just the silhouette of someone tall, lean, familiar, in the way janitors always were, slightly stooped, invisible. "You don't think?" Trujillo asked, raising a brow. "I'm not saying it's her," Greg muttered, though he was. Now in the canteen, Trujillo was winding the tension tighter, using her usual volume and flair. "I'm just saying," she added loud again. "It ain't normal to know every square inch of a base you ain't even served on. Maybe she lives here," someone joked. "Maybe she's part of the plumbing." Or a ghost, another said, like those haunted Navy ships. Laughter rose like steam. Maggie turned away from the noise and bent to pick up a napkin someone had dropped. Her knees didn't crack, though they might have wanted to. She moved slowly but deliberately, like someone who knew where all the quiet corners were. At the tech board outside the supply room, she paused, then took a folded slip of paper from her apron. She pressed it to the cork with a thumbtack already wedged between 2 layers of outdated inventory logs. "This wiring may need second check." She didn't sign it, not really. But the note looked a lot like others that had appeared over the past month, vacuum pipe leaking behind boiler. Labeling misprint shelf C should read D. Safety sign fell off hinge, secured with spare magnet. All written in the same narrow cursive. All unsigned. Jamal Reese was grabbing a second helping of apple crumble when he caught sight of her pinning the note. His tray hovered above the line for a second too long. "She writes those," he asked, more to himself than anyone. Greg passed behind him, clipboard in hand. "You've noticed them too," Jamal shrugged, cheeks puffed with dessert. "Just thought it was maintenance." Greg didn't reply. But that afternoon, his formal complaint landed quietly in the inbox of the Civilian Oversight Coordinator. It cited multiple undocumented appearances by non-security cleared personnel in limited access corridors and referenced pattern behavior inconsistent with assigned janitorial duties. When Maggie returned to the main hallway near the gym entrance, a white envelope waited for her beside her mop bucket. No one was nearby. She glanced both ways before picking it up. The letter was brief. Effective immediately, your janitorial access will be temporarily paused, pending review of clearance zones and movement logs. We appreciate your continued service. She read it twice, mouth set in a line so thin it nearly vanished. Then she folded it neatly in half, ran a finger along the crease, and slid it into her coat pocket. She rolled her mop bucket toward the rear corridor, past the vending machines and bulletin board layered in glitter paper turkeys and troop appreciation flyers. The air smelled of boiled potatoes and industrial soap. From her apron, she drew out a small square of wax paper and sat on the bench outside the storage room, unwrapping a peanut butter sandwich. The bread had been cut diagonally. She chewed slowly, eyes focused on nothing in particular. From inside her coat, she drew a metal thermos scuffed with age. The cap clicked softly as she twisted it off. Steam rose, carrying the scent of chamomile and honey. She took one sip, then another, then slid the thermos beside her on the bench. A locker across the hallway had a sticky note on its door, curling slightly at the corner. Jamal walked by, noticed it, and paused. "Thank you for keeping your boots off the bench." Someone who notices. His brow furrowed. It was the same handwriting as the tech board note. The same paper. The same quiet tone. That night, long after the canteen had closed, and the corridors dimmed to nightlight glow, Maggie pushed her mop into the storage room as she always did. She turned the handle slowly, as if it might squeak. It didn't. She stepped inside, the click of the lock echoing faintly behind her. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with detergent paper rolls, extra gloves. Her cleaning apron hung neatly on the peg to the right. She leaned the mop against the corner and set the folded letter beside it. The room held its breath. She folds the letter carefully, sets her mop in the storage room, and asks only, "Do I still have access to the memorial wing?" The name Snowlight hadn't passed through Commander Eli Stratton's thoughts in over 3 decades until today. It started with the draft in the hallway. The fog from outside curled around the glass doors like ghost fingers seeping into the cracks of the base as the sun dipped beyond the Florida horizon. It was quiet. Most of the training squads had finished their rotations and the halls carried the hush of an off-duty evening. Stratton liked this hour best. It reminded him of debriefs after ops fatigue hanging in the air, silence earned. He was just stepping out of the SEAL command office when he spotted her. Maggie, mop in hand, paused beside the hallway bulletin and pinned something small to the edge, another note in that same tight cursive. Room 4B, leaking valve. She didn't see him at first. She turned slightly, and that's when something thin and yellowed slipped from her coat pocket. It fluttered to the ground and settled near Stratton's boots. He bent down and picked it up. At first it was just an old photograph, but then his hand stopped. The image tugged him backward through decades. The snowy ground, the blurred faces, and her. That woman standing just off-center, not smiling, not needing to. He stepped forward, voice low. "Where did you get this?" Maggie turned, gaze calm. "Found it," she said, not apologetic, not evasive, just true. Stratton didn't ask more. He held the photograph for a moment longer, then tucked it inside the folder under his arm. The hallway lights buzzed faintly overhead. "Walk with me," he said. She did. Inside the command room, the overhead fluorescents cast everything in cool blue. He gestured toward the wall cabinet, locked with an old key still dangling from a nail above the desk. Most files were digital now, but not these. He flipped through folders until he found the one without a label. Inside were photographs, memos, one sheet dated 1989, with half its text blacked out. The same photo sat there, cleaner, less faded. His hands were steady, but his jaw had set in a way that said this moment hurt. She was good, he murmured. Too good. Vanished before they could pin her down. Operation Thessaly. Cold zone. Wiped from records, except for those of us who still remember. Maggie didn't speak. Stratton looked up. Snowlight. That's what we called her. She said nothing. Later, Jamal watched from across the quad as Stratton stood by the windows of the admin wing, his shoulders oddly still. In his hand he held something white edges curled with age. Jamal couldn't see the details, but he knew that photo. It was the one the janitor had picked up outside the memorial wall. The one no one seemed to notice. He had noticed. That same evening, while others gathered near the mess for pie tastings and care package assembly, Maggie walked the dim corridor toward the back bench just beyond the tool depot, where no one lingered. She knelt slowly, placing her palm flat on the smooth stone of the bench base. She closed her eyes for a long moment. No one knew she'd helped fund that memorial. No one had asked. Back in her quarters, she unpinned the name badge from her shirt and rubbed the ache in her wrist. The arthritis had flared again. She pressed a heat patch along the joint and exhaled slowly. The room smelled faintly of lavender and chamomile. On her nightstand sat the same dog-eared book she always carried from post to post, Profiles of Quiet Valor. The spine had cracked long ago, but the pages still held their shape. She opened to Chapter 7, not to read, but to rest her hand where her name had once appeared in print before the reprint editions scrubbed it clean. Across the base in his office, Stratton typed slowly under the soft glow of his desk lamp. His fingers hovered over the keys before he finished the subject line. Request Spectre Legacy File. Clearance level black. Subject O'Hara M. Codename Snowlight. The files had dust so thick they smelled like time, but one name inside made the room go still. Commander Eli Stratton stood over the open box, the faint rays of early light struggling through the blinds behind him. Fog still hugged the coastline, turning the base into a watercolor of shadows. He'd unlocked the records room at Dawn Key, jangling against the brass tag he hadn't used in years. The metal drawer groaned as it slid open, reluctant like a memory long buried. Inside, file after file wore the yellow of forgetfulness, edges curled, tabs faded. Most had been digitized years ago, but not this drawer. These were the paper ghosts. He found it near the back. Spectre Division, 1987. Thin but heavy somehow. The cover bore the seal stamped once in red ink. Beneath it, a black and white photo of 5 operatives stood in a jungle clearing. Faces blurred not by accident, but by black marker. Only one figure remained untouched. Slight build, no smile. Eyes like she'd already seen the end of something. He turned the page slowly. Codename Snowlight, role intelligence plus field support, status operative, on assignment, unlisted notes. Known for blending into civilian environments. High moral discretion, extreme efficiency. Field confirmed in Thessaly, Panama, and off-book Egypt redacted. Stratton exhaled through his nose. He remembered Panama, the smell of wet soil, the static in the comms, the dread that sank into your boots. And then that figure slipping past a burning truck, dragging a hostage behind her like she had nothing to prove and no need for backup. They told him later she was never there. In the corridor outside base, life stirred. Radios clicked on. Boots scuffed. But Stratton stayed still a moment longer, the folder open like a confession. Behind his door, a memo waited on his desk. Black level clearance request approved. Subject O'Hara M. He folded it into the folder, set the whole thing gently into a locked drawer, and whispered, "They never taught us to recognize heroes in janitor shoes." Down the hall, Maggie was polishing brass plaques in the memorial wing. Her hands moved in slow arcs, cloth against metal, the faint scent of lemon oil rising in the air. Each name she touched lingered on her fingertips. She knew most of them. Some had called her Snowlight. Others never got the chance. Jamal walked by just as she reattached a torn corner of an old photo, one edge curled up from years of air conditioning drafts and humidity. She dabbed the tiniest bead of glue and pressed it back down, smoothing the crease like a seamstress mending a treasured quilt. He didn't speak, just watched. Her face was calm, not distant, just quiet. Across base, Greg Vassell leaned on the break room counter, retelling the ghost story he'd built like a stage prop. "I'm telling you," he said to Trujillo and two others, "none of it adds up. There's no service file, no rank, no records, just stories. Janitor gets into restricted zones, and suddenly she's some kind of legend." Trujillo raised a brow. "Maybe the mop's a cover for laser eyes." Laughter followed, but thinner than usual. Jamal walked past without looking their way. That afternoon, fog began to lift. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the SEAL main building, and birds reappeared over the empty training field. Thanksgiving Eve had arrived, and with it the lull before celebration. Inside his office, Stratton stared out at the flagpole. Behind him, the room held still air. Major Delaney sat opposite, arms crossed, gaze steady. "You're serious?" Delaney asked, voice low. Stratton nodded. "I pulled the file myself. She was Spectre. Black level. She's a janitor." Stratton turned. She was more than that long before she ever touched a mop on this base. "We've been saluting ghosts and ignoring the living." Delaney rubbed his jaw, then leaned forward. "What do you want me to do?" Stratton picked up a blank envelope, slid a note inside, and sealed it. "Deliver this. Quietly. And clear room A for a strategic review. Just one guest." The major paused, took the envelope, and nodded without another word. Maggie had just set her cleaning caddy behind the gym annex when Delaney approached. He handed her the envelope without expression, then turned on his heel and left. She turned it in her hands, felt the weight of the paper. Her name wasn't on the outside, just one phrase stamped neatly in blue: requested presence. Strategic review, SEAL Room A. She wore no uniform, no insignia yet. Every SEAL in the room rose when she entered. Room A had never been that quiet. The oak table stretched long and bare down the center, polished just enough to reflect the thin lines of sunlight slipping past half-closed blinds. Flags stood in silent formation at the far end, their cloth edges unmoving in the stillness. Around the table sat men and women who had spent years in distant places, trained for chaos but now shifted uncomfortably in silence, their medals suddenly feeling heavier. Maggie stepped in. Her shoes made no sound against the tile. She wore what she always did, clean white blouse sleeves neatly pressed, the collar tucked just right beneath her chin. Her hair, silver as snow, was pulled back like always. No makeup. No badge. Just Maggie. She paused in the doorway, eyes sweeping the room. If she was surprised, she didn't show it. The seats were filled. Commander Stratton stood at the head, hands clasped behind his back. His expression was unreadable, but his posture carried the reverence of a ceremony not listed on any official schedule. Then he spoke. In service to country, his voice steady, to honor, to the unseen, today we stand. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. And then Jamal stood. He moved without hesitation, boots scuffing just slightly as he rose to full height and brought his hand to his brow. One by one the others followed. Uniforms rustled, chairs creaked back, hands raised in salute. There was no anthem, no trumpet, just silence and the sound of gratitude unspoken for far too long. Greg Vassell lingered. His gaze dropped to the floor, then to his hands. He did not rise. After a moment, he stepped back toward the door, expression pale. No one stopped him. Maggie looked at none of them directly. Her eyes seemed to move beyond the room, as if scanning memories rather than people. She took slow, even steps forward until she reached the center of the room. Stratton stepped toward her, holding something small in both hands. It wasn't a medal. It was older, silver oval, barely the size of a matchbox, a snowflake etched at the center, not stylized, but exact with tiny numbers running along its edge. Coordinates. The kind no civilian would recognize, but those who'd served in field operations would never forget. He held it out. She took it carefully, her fingers steady until they weren't. The tremble was almost imperceptible, like a breeze through long grass. She said nothing for a long time, then folded her hand around it and lowered it into the front pocket of her apron. "I never asked for recognition," she said quietly. "I just didn't want anyone to be forgotten." A stillness settled again. Then slowly, as if choreographed by something deeper than command, the SEALs lowered their salutes, but kept their eyes on her. Some nodded. One wiped at his cheek. She inclined her head slightly. No smile. But her eyes shimmered not with pride, but with something more private. A quiet release. The moment passed like a wave rolling onto shore, and then away again. No applause. No speeches. Just the shared knowledge that something sacred had happened, and none of them would quite speak of it outside those walls. As she turned to leave the room, parted like the tide, she stepped out into the corridor, the sound of her shoes returning to silence. In the hallway, Jamal waited, hands tucked behind his back like a recruit on parade. He didn't say much, just walked a few paces beside her, then asked permission to walk with you, ma'am. Thanksgiving morning broke with fog, hush, and a folded letter left beneath a wooden bench. The mist hung low over the field, soft as breath on glass. A quiet pressed down over the memorial courtyard, wrapping the trimmed hedges and old flagpole in a stillness that felt earned, not empty. Somewhere behind the chapel, a bell gave one muted chime, then nothing but the faint crunch of boots on gravel. The wooden bench stood where it always had, facing east, flanked by small plaques, too weather-worn to read without kneeling. Maggie approached it with measured steps, the kind that carried no urgency but knew exactly where they were going. A breeze stirred the edges of her coat as she reached beneath the bench and pulled out the folded paper. Her name was written on the outside in neat squared print. She sat without fanfare and opened the letter. "Thanks for cleaning more than just floors. You cleaned the fog from our eyes." Jamal, she read it twice. The first time for the words, the second time for what he couldn't fit into them. Then slowly, she folded the note again and tucked it into the inside pocket of her coat, where the photograph from the wall had once been. In the distance, a small group of recruits gathered in formation. Jamal stood among them, not out front, not barking orders, just there, offering a steady hand. A young girl, probably just through orientation, fumbled with the angle of her miniature flag. Jamal knelt beside her, adjusted her grip gently, and whispered something Maggie couldn't hear. As they moved along the pathway, placing small care packages at the base of memorial stones, another boy leaned toward Jamal and asked quietly, "Is it true she was a SEAL?" Jamal didn't answer right away. Then, with a small smile, he said, "No. She trained the ones SEALs still talk about." Maggie rose slowly from the bench, knees stiff but determined. She brushed a leaf from the armrest and walked toward the group, carrying nothing but her presence. No one saluted this time. They simply stepped aside, making room like water around a stone. Commander Stratton stood near the flagpole, eyes forward. As she approached, he turned and spoke with the calm authority of someone who had waited years to say it. "Ms. O'Hara, would you lead the remembrance?" She nodded. She didn't walk to the podium, didn't unfold notes, or raise her voice. She stepped in front of the gathered circle, where the wind had stilled, and even the flag above seemed to hold its breath. Then she said only one thing. "Let us remember with silence, not to forget, but to feel." And they did. No cameras, no anthem. Just silence deep enough to reach the corners of memory. The leaves swirled gently at their feet, caught in a soft wind that stirred without sound. The flag no longer flapped. It hung, folding slowly against itself, as if settling into reverence. And then it happened. A single snowflake drifted down from the sky, white soft and impossibly out of season. The recruits looked up. A murmur passed among them. Snow in Florida in November. No one spoke the oddity aloud. They just watched as that lone flake landed on the shoulder of Maggie's coat, melting without protest. Jamal stood a little off to the side, posture upright, expression steady. He brought his hand to his brow, held the salute firmly, not for what had passed, but for what he now understood. Across the field, Maggie glanced once toward him. Then quietly, she turned and walked back toward the bench, each step part of the place itself. On that quiet Thanksgiving morning, the bench that once held silence now carried a message of unseen valor. Maggie O'Hara had never asked to be noticed, yet her quiet devotion had spoken louder than medals ever could. Kindness, when given without condition or applause, finds its way through the cracks of even the most rigid judgments. Like a lantern left glowing on a forgotten path, it waits patiently for someone to see its light. So maybe today we pause and look twice because the person sweeping the floor might just be the one who once cleared the way.